The road into the valley wound like wire around a spool, each hairpin edged by stacked walls of snow. Jonas kept both hands tight on the wheel, leaning forward as if body weight could help the tire's grip. The rental's heater ticked tiredly. Icy breath feathered the inside of the windshield whenever Clara laughed at something that wasn't funny. "It looks smaller on the map," she said, pointing toward a sliver of yellow light below. The town lay gathered along a river the color of steel, roofs shouldering drifts, chimneys breathing. Beyond it, the mountains rose like black sails. "We're already late," Elise said, checking her phone even though there was no service. "Matthew said the chalet keys in a lockbox by the door. We drop our bags, go eat." "Easy, easy," Jonas agreed. He didn't believe it, but he knew the rhythm of reassurances. As a paramedic, he knew when a room needed steadiness, friends included. By the time they found the chalet, a narrow timber house at the end of a side lane, shutters painted the stubborn blue of old postcards, the snow had begun again. The lockbox obeyed Elise's code on the second try. Inside, the place felt cleaner than a rental usually does. Stacked plates, folded wool blankets, a smell of cold soap. Jonas lit the stove. Clara opened the curtains to darkness, so complete it felt like a wall. "I saw a bar in town," Matthew said from behind them, blowing on his hands. He had arrived by train an hour earlier, said he'd wait in the center. Warm light, old men, the works. Come on. The bar was called Le Renard Gris, a fox painted in curling lines above the door. A half-dozen locals were bent over card games. A dog slept under the radiator. Their arrival made a small wave through the room, the way outsiders always do, but it broke without incident. The bartender, woman in her 50s, hair like salt, set bowls of onion soup with a nod, then 4 tumblers of wine. Heat sank into their backs. The air smelled of melted cheese, damp wool, smoke. They were halfway through the soup when the man came in. He was not dramatic, not limping, not bleeding. He was just soaked, hatless, hair in spikes, eyes glassy with the cold. He scanned the room once, closed the door softly behind him, and sat at the small table near the window. No one greeted him. He did not greet anyone. He ordered nothing. He simply unbuttoned his coat with fumbling hands and placed a black briefcase on the floor between his boots. Elise watched him. "He's shaking." "It's -10, Clara said, but she watched too. The man glanced at the window every 30 seconds, like a metronome. After 5 minutes, 2 cars swept by outside. Dark shapes, snow scuffed up by studded tires, red tail lights smeared by the glass. The man flinched. He stood. He looked back at the briefcase, hesitated, then left it where it was and walked out. "He forgot his case," Clara murmured. The bartender had her back turned, unstacking glasses. The locals peered at their cards. Matthew's chair scraped. "I'll catch him," he said, but he didn't move fast. He went to the door, opened it, peered into the snow. The street was empty. "Leave it," Elise said. Matthew closed the door, weighing something. Then he bent, hooked a finger through the handle, and lifted the briefcase. "We'll give it back if he returns." "Or to the bartender," Jonas said. "She'll just put it behind the bar. Anyone could claim it. If it's important." The case was heavy in a way that suggested paper and metal. It had 2 silver clasps, scuffed. No combination lock. Someone had scratched a symbol into the corner, a tidy X inside a circle. It looked more bored than careful than meaningful. Jonas could feel the heat in the bar turning into a tension. The dog opened one eye. He nodded to the bartender, who shrugged. "Your business." They left with the briefcase, the sky feathering flakes into their faces, the snow swallowing the sound of their boots. The river made a low, constant noise like a fridge humming in the next room. The town had already withdrawn into itself, shutters closed, the big Christmas star over the square switched off. When they reached the lane, Jonas glanced back and saw two sets of headlights pause at the far end of the street, as if synchronizing, then continue on. Inside the chalet, they put the case on the table. For a moment nobody spoke. The windows were black. The stove ticked softly. Matthew clicked the clasps. "Don't," Elise said, not loudly. It meant more because it wasn't loud. "We're not keeping it. We're seeing what it is," Matthew said, and lifted the lid. Inside, the smell of cold paper. A thick manila folder banded with elastic. A smaller envelope. A cheap mobile phone, powered off, scuffed. A USB stick taped to the folder. And money. Neat, dense bricks of CHF notes bound with paper bands, the kind that made Jonas's mouth go dry simply because they were so compact, so factual about their amount. Clara swallowed. "This is bad." Jonas reached for the folder. The elastic snapped easily. The first page looked like a report with sections and subheadings he didn't understand, logos he recognized only as official adjacent. A stamp on the top corner read confidential/intern. The words were in French and German. There were small aerial photographs, a list of alphanumeric codes, abbreviated place names near the border. "Close it," Elise said. Her hands were flat on the table, white at the knuckles. "Put it back and we'll return it to the bar." "How?" Matthew asked. "It's probably closed now. And what if someone else is looking?" Something slid under the front door. A soft hiss against wood. They all turned at once. Jonas crossed the room in 3 steps and found a folded piece of paper on the mat, the edges damp with melt. He brought it back, heart-hopping. The paper carried a simple, careful handwriting. "Return it, or none of you leave alive." No signature. No flourish. Just ink and the steady, practical threat that turned the room smaller around them. The 4 of them stood, listening to the sound the snow made, which was no sound at all, and somewhere beyond the curtains, a car idled briefly, then went quiet. They didn't sleep. The chalet seemed to shrink as the hours dragged, every creak of the timbers magnified. Jonas set the briefcase back on the table and folded the note beside it like evidence, his paramedic's mind already cataloguing steps, consequences. Elise kept pacing the small living room, her boots still on, while Clara hugged herself in one of the blankets, eyes wide and glassy in the flicker of the stove. Matthew sat opposite the case, leaning forward, elbows on knees, staring at it as though he could will its contents into making sense. "We can't stay here," Elise said finally. "They know where we are. That note wasn't random. They slid it under our door, which means they followed us from the bar." Jonas nodded slowly. "Tomorrow morning we take it to the gendarmerie in town. We explain what happened. They'll know what to do." "Tomorrow morning?" Elise snapped. "Jonas, whoever they are, they're already watching. You think they're going to let us stroll into the police station with this?" "It's the only safe move," Jonas said, keeping his tone steady. "Safe?" Clara's voice cracked. "Did you read the note?" She buried her face in her hands. "This is insane. We should never have touched it." Matthew raised his head. His expression was oddly calm, almost detached. "If we return it, how? Who do we give it to? The man's gone. The cars outside weren't locals. We don't know who's chasing who. If we hand it over to the wrong people," he gestured at the envelope of cash, "we might not get a second chance." Jonas studied him. "You sound like you've thought about this before." Matthew smiled faintly, then shook his head. Just logic. You don't carry files like that unless they're worth killing over. The snowstorm thickened through the night. By dawn, the chalet was half buried, the lane outside smoothed into a white wall. Jonas tried his phone again. No service. The landline on the kitchen wall was dead. Power still hummed, but he knew alpine storms could cut lines fast. They decided to leave together, briefcase in hand, as soon as the bakery on the square opened. At least there would be witnesses. But when they reached the town center, breath steaming, boots crunching in snow, they found shutters still closed, doors locked. A few faint tire tracks ran along the street, already softening. The air carried that muffled, heavy silence only mountains could hold. They hadn't spoken since leaving the chalet, each of them wound too tight. When they passed the bar, Le Renard Gris, the Fox sign creaking in the wind, Jonas felt a prickling between his shoulders. The door hung ajar. Elise noticed too. She caught his arm. "Don't." But Matthew was already stepping inside. The others followed, unwilling to let him vanish alone. The bar was empty. The tables were overturned, one chair split in two, glasses shattered across the floor. A smear of dark liquid, wine, Jonas told himself, streaked across the counter. The dog was gone. Behind the bar, on the wooden floorboards, lay a scarf. Pale grey wool. Elise bent down slowly, fingers brushing it. When she looked up, her face had gone the color of snow. "That's his," she whispered. "Whose?" Clara asked. "The man from last night. He was wearing this when he came in." Jonas scanned the room. No sign of a struggle that ended clean. Whoever had come for the man had been efficient. The briefcase in his arms felt suddenly radioactive. They left quickly, back into the square where the silence pressed harder. Jonas could swear the windows were watching. "Back to the chalet," Elise urged. "Now." But they hadn't made it halfway down the street when a black SUV rolled slowly around the corner. Its windows were tinted, snow clumped in the wheel wells. It idled across their path, blocking the narrow road. The passenger window lowered halfway. A man inside, his face indistinct behind dark glasses, looked at them with an expression that wasn't curiosity. Jonas felt Elisa's hand clutch his sleeve. The man raised a gloved finger and pointed directly at the briefcase in Jonas's grip. Then the window rolled up. The SUV didn't move. "They're waiting," Clara whispered, voice breaking. Matthew licked his lips, eyes darting between Jonas and Elise. "We can't go back. Not with them here. There's another path, the hiking trail behind the church. It leads toward the pass. We can cut across, lose them in the woods. In this storm," Jonas demanded. "It's that or hand it over," Matthew said. "And if we hand it over, we don't get to walk away." Elise looked between them, snow catching in her lashes. "Then we run." Jonas glanced once more at the SUV. The driver hadn't moved. He felt his heart kick hard, like a fist in his chest. "Fine," he said, tightening his grip on the handle. "Let's move." They turned toward the church, boots breaking new paths through knee-high snow, as behind them the SUV revved softly and began to follow. The church loomed ahead, its stone walls swallowed in white, bell tower poking like a finger through the storm. Jonas led, lungs burning as snowflakes clung to his beard. Behind him, Clara stumbled, clutching Elisa's arm. Matthew, unbothered by pace, kept glancing over his shoulder at the SUV that crept along the street like a predator refusing to pounce. They rounded the churchyard wall and found the trailhead, a narrow wooden sign half buried under snow, Col de Loups, 3.7 kilometers. The path of wolves. Jonas hesitated. This is suicide. It's cover, Matthew countered. They can't drive up here. Once we're over the ridge, there's a back road to the train line. Or a dead end, Elise muttered, pulling Clara along. But she followed. The path rose steeply, switchbacking into the firs. The storm thickened, turning the trees into silhouettes smudged by white. Jonas felt the weight of the briefcase drag his arm down, his shoulder aching. The trail beneath their boots was unbroken. No one had used it since the snowfall began. Clara slipped and nearly went down, yanking Elise with her. Jonas caught them both. Clara's face was wet with melted flakes, streaked with tears. "I can't do this. We're not built for this." "We don't have a choice," Elise said firmly, though her own breath rasped in her chest. They pressed on. Minutes dragged into half an hour. Every gust of wind carried phantom noises, an engine, a shout, a crack of a branch. Jonas couldn't tell if it was paranoia or pursuit. Then they found the tracks. Fresh prints in the snow ahead, not animal but boots, zigzagging up the slope. Jonas crouched, brushing the snow away. Someone's already up here. Matthew peered over his shoulder. Could be hunters. Could be them. They wouldn't leave the car if they didn't have to, Jonas argued, but his words carried no conviction. He checked behind. Through the storm he glimpsed a dark figure at the base of the trail, standing still, watching. The SUV remained parked below, headlights faint through the curtain of snow. "We keep moving," Jonas urged. They climbed higher, the trail narrowing until only one person could pass at a time. The pines thinned, giving way to jagged rock faces. Snow clung to ledges above like coiled traps. Elise kept checking her phone, even though the screen glowed no service. Clara muttered prayers under her breath, a string of whispers that made Jonas's skin prickle. At a bend sheltered by rock, they stopped to catch breath. Matthew slid down onto a boulder, face flushed. "We should open it again," he said. "See if there's anything useful inside. Coordinates, names, anything we can trade." "No," Jonas said sharply. But Matthew leaned forward, his eyes bright. "Think about it, Jonas. Whoever wants this briefcase isn't going to let us walk just because we hand it back. But if we know what's inside, if we hold leverage, maybe we bargain." Elise rounded on him. "Leverage? Against people who leave death notes under doors? You'll get us all killed." Matthew's smile tilted. "Or save us. You don't know how these things work." Jonas stared at him. "And you do." The silence after that was louder than the storm. Matthew looked away, tightening his gloves. Elise caught Jonas's eye, her suspicion reflected back. Before anyone could speak further, Clara hissed, "Listen." Footsteps, crunching through snow from below, steady, deliberate, closer than they should have been. Jonas's heart lurched. He motioned for silence, then pulled them all into the shadow of an overhang. A minute later, a figure emerged through the snowfall, tall, dark parka, hood pulled low. The man stopped on the trail not 10 meters away, scanning the slope. He carried no lantern, no walking stick, just moved like he belonged here. Clara whimpered. Elisa's hand clamped over her mouth. Jonas's pulse hammered in his ears. The man bent briefly, examining the tracks in the snow, then straightened and looked uphill, directly toward where they hid. He didn't speak, didn't call out. He just stood, head tilted, as if he could feel their breath. Then, without hurry, he resumed walking up the trail. Jonas exhaled, forcing calm. "We can't outpace him forever." Elise glanced at the briefcase. Maybe we don't need to. Maybe we throw it into the ravine and walk away. No, Matthew snapped, louder than necessary. If we give it up now, we're defenseless. And if we keep it, we're bait, Jonas retorted. The argument dissolved into silence, each of them knowing the decision would tear them apart sooner or later. They rose, followed the trail upward, snow soaking their clothes, lungs aching. At the next ridge, Jonas looked back. Through the veil of storm, two more figures had joined the first. Slowly, methodically, they were climbing after them. And worse, when Jonas turned forward again, he saw fresh prints veering off the trail ahead. Whoever had made them hadn't come from behind. Someone was already waiting above. The prints ahead veered off the trail, cutting toward a stand of wind-stunted firs where a low stone shelter hunched under snow. Someone had left the door unlatched. It knocked softly in the wind. Jonas motioned them inside, every nerve lit. The shelter was a single room. A bench, a rusted stove, a coil of old rope nailed to the wall. It smelled like mice and damp wool. There was a window the size of a book, rimmed with ice. Jonas set the briefcase on the bench and pressed his palms on the wood until his hands stopped shaking. "We can catch breath," he said, listening for footsteps. Snow hissed past the door, a constant whisper. Elise took the cheap mobile from the case and thumbed it on. Jonas stared. "You know the pin?" She entered 4 numbers without looking. The screen blinked awake. "We don't have time to." "What is this, Elise?" Jonas kept his voice level, though his heart banged at his ribs. "You've been leading us blind." She winced as if he'd slapped her. "I told you the truth that would keep you safest at each minute. That's not the same as lying." She gestured at the briefcase. "The man from the bar was my source. I translate contractor files for a Swiss firm. I found payments that made no sense. Consultancy fees to shell companies that don't exist, routed through customs contracts on both sides of the border. He told me what they were buying: access, manifests, blind spots. Proof of it is in there. I was supposed to meet him quietly, take the documents to internal affairs. The pass was the handoff point if the bar was compromised." "You dragged us into it," Clara whispered, shaking now in a way that wasn't from cold. "I tried not to. I told you we should have stayed in Geneva last night, but Matthew wanted the chalet." Matthew's laugh came out thin and hard. "Don't put this on me. You could have said no to the trip, Elise." She looked over at him as if examining a stranger. "When you went to the door at Le Renard Gris, you didn't go to catch the man. You made a call." "To who?" "Don't do this," he said, but the color had drained from his face. "You knew the mark on the case," Elise said, voice flat. "X inside a circle. I saw your eyes when you lifted it." Jonas's stomach dropped. He pivoted toward Matthew. "What did you do?" "Nothing you wouldn't have done," Matthew snapped. "We're stuck in a dead town with a case of money and a target on our backs. I called a number I use for favors. Figured we'd hand this over and walk. Profit for us. Clean exit." Clara stared. "We're your friends." Matthew spread his hands, shrugging off the word like snow. "And I'm getting you out alive." From outside came the steady crunch of boots. Not one person. Several. Another set moved above, snow whispering off a ledge. Jonas slid the case off the bench and tucked it under his arm. "We're moving." "Wait," Elise said, and crossed to him fast, fingers finding the tape on the USB and tearing it free. She pressed the stick into Jonas's palm. "In case this goes wrong." "Stop," Matthew hissed, and his hand came out of his jacket with a compact pistol, black as the narrow window. He didn't point it yet. He didn't need to. "Give me the case." "Put that away," Jonas said quietly, blood roaring in his ears. Matthew's jaw tightened. "I'll meet them outside. I'll say I took it. You three go down the other side. Whatever you think of me, this saves us." Clara sobbed, a small animal sound. Elisa's eyes never left Matthew's face. "You think they're going to pay you and let the rest of us walk? You called people you don't understand." The door wrenched, snow flinging in. A man filled the frame. Parka, hood, mirrored ski goggles. Another shadow hunched behind him. A voice from the storm, heavily accented French. "Briefcase." At the same instant, from the ridge above, another shout tore the air. "Police!" "Sortez les mains en l'air." The word cracked like a gunshot. Jonas froze. Which voice was real? Which wanted them dead? There were no uniforms, no badges, just the storm swallowing everything. Matthew took that single second of confusion and moved. He lunged for the door, shoving past the man, using surprise as a weapon. Outside, the white roared around him. He ran along the lip of the slope, the briefcase clamped to his chest like a life vest. "Matthew!" Clara cried, stepping after him onto the drift, and the mountain answered. It started with a low, concussive whump, the snowpack settling. Then the surface cracked in a line that slit the slope above them. The slab fractured, the entire face of the path shivering, then sliding, then accelerating with a sound like a train tearing itself free of tracks. Jonas grabbed Clara, but her boots vanished from under her, and the force ripped his hands apart. The man in the doorway dropped, disappearing, avalanche swallowing shouting and bodies and scents. Elise hit the shelter wall, mouth open, eyes blown wide. Then the white took her too, pulling her out through the door like a ribbon. Jonas moved without thinking. He threw himself at the coil of rope on the wall, fingers numb, wrenching it free and looping it around the iron ring bolted to the stone. He clipped a carabiner he didn't remember seeing through his belt loop and the rope by instinct. The wave hit, snow hammering him flat, stuffing his mouth, pressure like a hand over his entire body. He slammed against the door frame, the ropes bite a fire in his hip. His world became white and pressure and the animal fact of breath. His mind emptied to a single imperative: do not let go. Time lost shape. He coughed ice. He clawed at the mass packed against his face and found air in ragged gulps. The avalanche released its force second by second until the shelter stood in a weird negative space, half buried in the frozen churn, the door an ice-crusted edge. Jonas hung crooked in his harness of rope, coughing until spots danced in his vision. Silence fell, a silence heavy and obscene. He dug. He dug until his nails split and his knuckles bled and his arms shook so badly he couldn't lift his hands. He uncovered a sleeve that wasn't attached to anything. He uncovered a glove that was empty. He uncovered nothing else. Hours later, he could not count how many. An orange dot fought its way through the storm below. A guide in a neon jacket. Then more, a swarm of ants on a white sheet, voices thin and far. They reached him with poles and shovels and questions that made no sense. He told them friends' names that sounded unfamiliar as he spoke them. He pointed where he had seen bodies slide. The rescuers marked the surface with wands, listened with plastic horns pressed to the snow, sketched grids with flags. The helicopter could not come in this weather. The mountain kept what it had taken. At the gendarmerie infirmary in town that night, Jonas lay under a scratchy blanket and stared at the ceiling while a nurse cleaned the pads of his ravaged hands with something that smelled like tulips and poison. He felt the small rectangle in his pocket only when he turned on his side and the edge bit his thigh. The USB. He had forgotten it existed, the way people forget breathing while counting breaths. He closed his fingers around it so tightly his knuckles creaked. A uniformed officer came with a notepad and a look that tried to be both kind and skeptical. "We have teams still searching," he said in careful French. "The avalanche was very large. I'm sorry." Jonas nodded like a mechanical toy. If anyone comes asking for me," he said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his own voice, "you call me first." "Who would come?" the officer asked. "I don't know," Jonas said, and realized it was the truest sentence he'd ever spoken. After the officer left, Jonas rose on shaky legs and stood at the window. Outside, the square star was lit again, a pale, ridiculous wreath in the storm. He could just see Le Renard Gris through the flakes, its fox sign keening on its hinge. The town looked like a postcard from a life that belonged to someone else. His phone vibrated on the bedside table, a miracle of returning service. An unknown number. He almost let it ring out, then answered. A woman's voice, the vowels clipped. Not Elise. Not anyone he knew. "Mr. Richter," she said, using his last name with a precision that made his skin go tight. "You have something that belongs to us." He looked down at his hand. He hadn't realized he'd taken the USB out of his pocket. It sat on his palm like a tiny, indifferent tooth. "Who is this?" he asked. "We're the ones who keep people from not leaving alive," the woman said. The phrase slotted into his memory like a key. The handwriting on the note had been careful, practical. He understood suddenly that the warning had never been a promise to kill. It had been a statement of capacity from either side. It had always been a question of who "we" was. "Meet me tomorrow at 9, the woman said, and named a cafe in the larger town down valley where the road stayed open even when the small places shut. "Bring the drive. You will be safe." Jonas looked at the snow lifting in billows over the square, listened to the wind lean against the eaves as if testing the house's bones. Behind his eyes, he saw Elisa's face at the shelter door, fear and fury and a kind of bitter relief, as if a story she'd held alone had finally told itself. He saw Matthew running, the briefcase clutched to his chest like a prize. He saw Clara's hand vanishing into white, fingers splayed, reaching. He closed his fist around the USB until the plastic clicked. "I'll decide in the morning," he said, and ended the call. In the glass, his reflection doubled and tripled, a man looking back at himself from a dozen slightly wrong angles. When he stepped forward, the reflections moved with him, and behind them, on the snow-blind street, a pair of headlights paused at the far end of town, as if synchronizing, then continued on. Jonas set the USB on the windowsill and sat on the edge of the bed until the light outside paled and the storm spent itself. He did not sleep. When dawn finally scraped over the roofs, turning the valley the color of old pewter, he stood, dressed, and put the small, indifferent tooth in his pocket. Whether he was carrying proof or a magnet for ruin, he couldn't say. But he could follow cause and effect. He could be the person who climbed out of a room and chose one hard thing over another, knowing that either choice made him the kind of man who would have to live with it. In the hallway, someone had pinned a lost and found note to a corkboard. It read, "Grey scarf found near the church. Ask at the desk." The handwriting was careful, practical. Jonas walked downstairs without looking for the desk. He stepped out into the brittle morning and headed toward the bus stop for the down valley town, the USB burning cold in his pocket, the mountains behind him stoic and silent as if they had executed a contract he would spend the rest of his life paying off.